Hey everybody, how's it going? It is Max with BuzzTox here, and unfortunately Trev is not here. He's in the middle of moving, he's got to settle in, and he's very busy at the moment. So we'll see how long I can talk about Westworld by myself. But before we get into the episode recap, I just want to talk about a couple of ideas. First of all, the episode is called Dissonance Theory. And what dissonance theory is it's pretty much mental stress or discomfort experienced by an individual who holds two or more contradictory beliefs or ideas. And that can really be applied to Maeve and Dolores because as a host, they're experiencing both like their thoughts that are programmed in their head, but they're also experiencing their other thoughts, which are more self-conscious, and they're becoming more human. So there's the contradiction between them being a host and what they're programmed to be, or being more human and what they want to be. And Trevor also did some research and came up with every single episode name so far applies to Dolores. And these names can be applied on surface level to different things, like the Stray. You could say it applies to the host that went out and fell into kind of a canyon that Ashley and Elsie had to approach. But on the inside level, it really applies to Dolores. And we're going to get into that next episode. I also really quickly want to talk about all the people who work at Westworld. The fact that they are hosts, I don't think that everyone is a host. I don't think that Ford is a host. I don't think that Theresa is a host. I don't think that Elsie is a host. I think that everyone who is meant to be human is human. However, Bernard for me is an exception because there are certain facts in place that would make sense for him to be a host. And I'll get definitely more into that as I talk about the recap. The next thing I want to talk about is timeline theory. Trevor and I, since episode 2, have been on this timeline theory train. And what's funny is that I don't watch any Westworld videos except for the ones that I produce. I don't know what people are thinking. I don't know what everyone's thoughts are about the episode. I only know what I think, and I jot down my ideas and I throw it out there. So to my surprise, everyone else also thought that William was the Man in Black 30 years in the past. And I am still a huge subscriber to this theory. I'm going to tone it down a bit. But I want you guys to know I'm a huge subscriber to this timeline theory, and I'm going to show you my perspective on all these different scenes, and then you can tell me what you make of it. Anyways, let's get into the recap. So we start off with Bernard talking to Dolores, and he's pretty much questioning her, asking her what happened, and she says that they killed her parents, and then she ran, and that she also killed somebody, and she pretty much says that she really feels hurt, and she feels like everyone she loves is gone. And Bernard asks her if she would want to make the pain go away. And she surprisingly doesn't want the feeling of pain to go away, because it's all she has left of them. And we see this really resonate with Bernard, because he said this to his wife about his son. And this is how he feels, all he's left of the memory of his son is the pain of him leaving him. And Dolores continues to talk about she feels spaces opening up in her. And Bernard quickly asks if they wrote that script for her. And she says she adapted the script from a dialogue about love, which I find really fascinating, because in the comment section down below, actually, Andrew Zenobi, I'll give you a shout out, he said Bernard said the same thing too, and it could shine some light on who Bernard is. Because I find it very interesting how, Bernard and Dolores both say the same thing. It could speak to Bernard being a host. However, it also could not. I just thought it was an interesting comparison. But I think this arc of Dolores and Maeve and all these other characters is that there's going to be a point where she's not going to be able to recount and reflect on her code. Bernard being able to ask her, where did you get that from? Do we code that for you? I think as they progress, they won't be able to access that because it's just going to be a part of their mind. And it's going to be there's going to become a total disconnect between them and their code. And it's just going to be their thoughts. But anyways, Dolores is asking Bernard for help and she doesn't know what to do. And she thinks that something's wrong with her. So Bernard offers her to try the maze, and he tells her that she needs to find the center. And he says that finding this maze may allow her to be free. So she accepts the challenge. And now I just want to talk about the state of this meeting. In the comment section below, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, Naji Ishag, he thinks that they are remote meetings, and a lot of people think that these are remote meetings since she is an android, who's to say that she can't access Bernard remotely. But I think at the same time, this theory of them remote talking, it comes out of nowhere in a sense that it's been created to explain how Dolores has been able to talk to Bernard while she is with William. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I think they have always shown that they do physical meetings. It's how they evaluate their tech. They sit down and they communicate to their host to see how they're feeling. And the only thing about dreams that have been provided in the show is that Elsie has said that they use dreams as a mechanism to kind of save their ass. If the androids see anything of the real world, they can chalk it up as a bad dream. They've only given them the concept of nightmares, not dreams. And I don't think Bernard talking to Dolores can be summed up as a nightmare. And this also plays into timeline theory. Bernard is in the present time. He is in a time where Dolores, his core code is disrupted and she's becoming more sentient. And he's talking to her about that. However, when she's with William, I believe that this is a different timeline. And I have a lot of things to back this up. So we see Dolores wake up with a gun in her hand. I don't think this is the gun that was in the drawer because we never saw her grab it. So she has this random gun in her hand and we see her kind of wake up, which you could assume that that was a dream with her and Bernard. But I think she had a meeting with Bernard 30 years later because this is 30 years in the past. And then she pretty much sees William and then they talk. It's nothing really important, nothing really significant. So let's move on. We go back to Maeve talking to Clementine about work. And then Maeve all of a sudden, boom, has a flashback. And she says she sees a lot of guests laughing and shooting everyone. And we see Clementine's eyes start bleeding. And then we find out that everyone is dead. And Maeve is kind of laying on the ground alive, almost like playing dead. And what I find interesting about this scene is that you hear kind of like a robotic static sound as this is going. And I found that really interesting because it almost plays as the ringing in our ears when we have an adrenaline rush. It's almost like they really immerse us into what she's going through. And the sounds in her head are more robotic, which I found really interesting. And then we see the crew come in and they pretty much clean up the massacre that just took place. And Maeve sees them operating on her, and then they don't remove a bullet because they don't have enough time. And she actually remembers this, and then she flashes back to a regular conversation. So we see Maeve all of a sudden in the middle of a conversation with Clementine. Now she shows kind of a concern with her stomach. And I think this is interesting because she is becoming more self-aware, and she's remembering more things outside and inside of Westworld. And I think what this really shows is her core code is becoming more and more broken in a sense because she's becoming less controllable. These hosts are supposed to stay asleep when they're getting operated on, and Maeve keeps waking up and seeing these things. So as I said earlier, I think it's going to get to a point where these commands don't work, and you're never going to be able to control them, and they're really going to become human in a sense. So then Maeve gets really panicked, and she finds blood on her clothes, so she leaves, and she sees a man operating on her, and she ends up drawing the image. It almost looks like an alien. I found it really interesting. And she tries to hide it under a floorboard. And she realizes that she's drawn that picture at least 10 more times. Which is a pretty crazy realization. Because every single time she realizes something and comes closer to answers, she forgets. So I think she's coming to terms that whatever she discovers, she's going to end up forgetting. So she's trying to figure out a plan to discover where she comes from. Even after she gets reset. Then we snap outside of Westworld with Theresa and Elsie. And they're talking about the host behavior that smashed his head. Now, I actually missed this in the last analysis video, but there's the physical side of it where he smashed his head in to try and hide the evidence of his chip, which I think definitely makes the most sense, and I actually can't believe I missed it. And this could speak a lot to what Ford's motives are. Maybe he programmed them to, pretty much self-destruct before they're able to grab him and discover what's going on. Or, Bernard has other motives. Who really knows? But I think that host is really trying to hide something because he went out in the middle of nowhere, so there has to be a reason why. And I think breaking his head really hides the evidence. But then there's also the emotional standpoint, which I took earlier, which really shows the next tier of sentience because killing yourself isn't logical. And I talked about this earlier. And robots are approached with a logical nature, and killing yourself is not logical. And I think the fact that he killed himself kind of hints at becoming more human. But Elsie's pretty much giving Theresa all these excuses, and Theresa just thinks that it's a way for programming to hide moments when they fuck up. So Theresa's team takes over the whole investigation to try and get answers. And Elsie talks to Bernard later, and he wishes that Bernard didn't cave to Theresa. And she tells Bernard she knows that something is messed up. Nothing is normal. Because the behavior is changing and people are noticing constellations. And a stray just walks out for no reason. She's telling Bernard that all this stuff that's happening is not normal. And Bernard points out that there is actually 3 stars in Orion, not 4. And he's saying that the people imagine things, not the hosts. So what I find really interesting about this scene is clearly Bernard is hiding something. I don't think anyone knows about his meetings with Dolores except for Ford might possibly know. So this just really speaks to Bernard's motives. Why does he not care? It could be because he always ends up defending Ford, and Ford pretty much created this whole thing. And I think Bernard, in a sense, trusts Ford. He realizes that these are seen as mistakes to the shareholders, but to Ford, they're not mistakes. It is the next step in attaining a goal. And Bernard, I think, has faith in Bernard's vision and his goal for the future of Westworld, and he's kind of following that. Now we get a really important scene with Dolores and William really wants to take her back to Sweetwater. And Logan came to a conclusion that Trev came up with in our last analysis video. He said that the park had to have sent Dolores to William because William needs to have something to give a shit about. But William isn't so sure. He doesn't believe that the park watches his every move. But Logan is confident they do. Because they are customers. And as a business, you need to please your customers. And if you have someone like William, who obviously is very integral and has a very strong moral compass, and he's not getting his full use out of Westworld. And for him to really enjoy Westworld, management has to figure out a way to please him. And to please him is to bring in this girl who actually takes a liking to him, who he has a history with, and put her in a dangerous situation that William is the only one who can solve it. And this just makes me think of Dolores when her parents got shot and she was in improvisation mode and she fled on her horse. The last thing she would do is fall into a man's arms and collapse. That doesn't make any sense. And she wasn't injured, so why would she be disoriented and fall in his arms? I think it's exactly what Trev said. The owners of the park literally said, let's take Dolores and send her to William. And that's what they did. They made her disoriented. They made her seem like a damsel in distress, and they literally make her fall in William's arms, which makes him feel a sense of responsibility and a sense of protection over her. And the fact that she went to William wasn't in her control. They sent her to William. So I think there's a big difference there, because the park right now, I don't think has a firm grasp on Dolores in present time, because she's in improvisation mode and she's on her own. And we get a glimpse of that later in the episode. But continuing on, Logan says that they should actually bump their stake in the company, since they gave William a sense of purpose, by giving him Dolores. So this says a lot, obviously. Obviously, these men are pretty wealthy and they're a part of a business as they're invested in the Westworld company. So I think this further connects William to the Man in Black. We learn later that he's a part of a foundation. And obviously the Man in Black has to be wealthy to spend so much time there, as it costs $40,000 to stay there, and possibly more, 30 years down the line for inflation. But the last shot of the scene is on William, and then they cut immediately to the Man in Black gutting out a snake. And I think these cuts are really important because they really do foreshadow certain story plots. So after gutting the snake, Lawrence and the Man in Black stumble across a woman named Armistice, and she actually has the snake tattoo that goes all the way up to her head. And while they're staring at her, a bunch of men hold them at gunpoint. And then Armistice comes forward, and the Man in Black actually kills two of them. It opens two spots so they can ride with her. But there's one thing I want to mention about this scene. A guy in the comment section below, Casper Elmer Simonson, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. He said the Man in Black recruits one ally per episode as he pursues the maze. So it raises the question, who's the Man in Black going to pursue next? And I really don't know. I know he has Teddy, so the next move is to, get answers from Teddy and pursue Wyatt. And Teddy's whole story is his arch nemesis is Wyatt. So he may be a good character in helping the Man in Black pursue Wyatt if he strikes a deal with him. Other than that, I can't really pinpoint another character unless Teddy knows somebody who he can introduce the Man in Black to. I'm not sure if there's anyone else he can recruit. Now, everybody, I want you to be patient with me. This is where it gets a little bit crazy. So Ashley is up looking at kind of this circular dome of Westworld, and he hears that Dolores is making a big deviation from her loop. And what I find interesting is that he does know her by name. There are a lot of other androids, or a lot of other hosts in Westworld, and I find it very interesting how he knows Dolores by name. I just wanted to point that out. And the first thing he asks is if she's accompanying a guest. And the woman says she doesn't know. She said that Ford is disrupting so many storylines with the new narrative, it's hard to tell. I think this is pretty much them hiding the fact that there are multiple timelines. If they tell you they don't know she's with a guest or not, it's a really good way to hide what Dolores is doing in that present time. and it makes it seem like she's with William. Because if what we were saying is true, and the company Westworld actually sent Dolores to William to make him happy, they would know that she is with William, and they would know that they sent her to William. In this case, it seems like they lost her and they don't know why she's gone. And that's because Dolores is operating on her own decisions. She's in improvisation mode and her family's been shot up, and Bernard just gave her a request to pursue a maze. Only Bernard knows that, not upper management, so that's why they don't know what the hell is going on and who she's with. Or if she's with no one for that matter. So what Ashley does is he flags her with behavior, and then they try and recruit her back and see if everything is checking out and see if she's okay. So now this scene with Dolores, there's a lot to pick from it, because there are two stories taking place at the same time. And you're going to be seeing this a lot. What happens is because Dolores goes on an adventure with William, and whatever she achieves with William, her present self, Dolores, is going back to these locations in pursuit of the maze. So everywhere she and William goes, you're going to get cuts during that with present time Dolores revisiting these locations to try and discover answers. And I think you see this a lot in this scene. So we start this scene with nobody by the fountain, and it seems pretty much empty. And Dolores is walking around just looking around. And this is past time. And as you look around the fountain, nobody is sitting there. Which really points to this is William timeline. And then she seems to notice somebody. And then this is the immediate cut, which is in the present time without William. They're using these simple cuts to jump between times. And this is Dolores almost pursuing answers for the maze. And she was here before. That's why she's coming here. So Dolores is actually talking to the kid of Lawrence. We've seen this. And now she's all alone because her mother's dead and her dad is taken prisoner by the man in black. And Dolores asks where she's from, and she says the same place as you. Don't you remember? And then we get a flashback to a white church, a circle in the sand, which is kind of the start of the maze carving. And then she snaps out and all of a sudden there's a maze carving in the dirt. And then we see another cut. That cut from her face to that man approaching her is now in the William timeline, 30 years in the past. If you look, the girl is not there anymore. Lawrence's daughter is now missing, and the carving doesn't seem to be in the dirt. And she's getting talked to by this guy. Now, you guys are asking, why is Dolores getting questioned? Because Ashley just sent someone out to pull her in. What this is that they've proven in the past that hosts actually are programmed to put things back in order. This host is operating on his own volition to try and get Dolores back home. He hasn't been told to, he's programmed to do that. And while this happens, she seems to be flashing back to her past. And he grabs her and she kind of holds him off, and then William comes and kind of saves the day. So a lot can be said about this. Maybe she was fighting him back because she was actually programmed to stay on with William, and this bot was trying to get her to return. I don't know. I'm not going to be able to know every answer, but I noticed that these cuts are very important, and they're definitely teasing certain things. Like the girl missing in certain shots and appearing in other shots shows definitely different timeline. And there's going to obviously be certain situations that I can't explain, but as the show goes on, I will hopefully be able to answer these questions. So then the shot ends with William pretty much telling him that Dolores is with him, and then he backs off. But this last shot is really important. If you look as they walk, they pan across the fountain and the girl's still missing, which shows that this is the past timeline. And then we quickly get a flash of the man in black looking over Armistice, who approaches a couple men for answers on a horse, and she ends up killing them both, and they take their horses. And then we flash again back to Dolores. So the switching between William and Dolores in the past time to the man in black, who could be William in the future if you want to look at through the timeline theory, I find very interesting. But Dolores pretty much apologizes to William for causing trouble. And she has no idea where she's going. And William tells her that he assumed that they just kept them in their zones. And then she goes on script and says she used to think that there was a path for everyone. And what I want to pull from this is that she is definitely following a script that she was given. She's been saying this since episode 1. And I think this almost proves that this is further in the past, because she most definitely is following a scripted remark that she's been saying throughout the whole series. And William asks her how she will find her way now. And she says she feels like something is calling her, and she feels like that there is a place for her, which is also a scripted thing that Dolores has always said. But what I find interesting is that everything turns black. William fades out, everything fades out, and then she looks into a starless sky. She just focuses in on the moon, which I find interesting because Elsie was almost interested with the constellations, is that they program them not to pay attention to stars. That's very out of the ordinary. And I think this also could hint at the past because Dolores doesn't see stars. It's almost like she's not programmed to in a sense. She just sees a black, empty sky. So everything fades away except the moon, and then the moon turns into an operation light. And then she sees herself bleeding, dead at her house, and as she kind of stumbles and William catches her, and she says that she gotta chill. So this part, it just shows Dolores kind of connecting to the actual reality of her being an android. And, looking at it through the timeline perspective, it could be Dolores, as soon as everything goes black, that's a cut to the future. You never know. So this is one of those things I have to wait until the next episode to see what's up. And then in the next scene, we learn a lot about the Man in Black. A couple of fans approach him and thank him for his foundation, because his foundation saved his sister's life. And pretty much the Man in Black tells him to shut the fuck up, because it's his vacation. So I think this speaks to who the Man in Black is. He's a very wealthy man, and he's a good man. And we've been saying this for a while. What makes him bad is how he treats the hosts. And he's been coming here for so long, he realizes that what he does really has no consequence. And he realizes, I'm sure, that he has to be nasty to the guests to pursue his goal of finding the maze or whatever that may be. So the Man in Black strikes a deal with Armistice that he will get what she wants out of a prison if she gives him answers behind her tattoo. He says he has interest in this tattoo because of this person named Arnold. He said that he created a world where you can do whatever you want, but you can't die. And what's funny or ironic is that Arnold broke his own rule and died in the park. The Man in Black believes that he had one more story to tell. With story with real stakes and with violence. And what I find interesting is that Arnold did die in the park, and it was because he believed that the guests were his equals, and we really learn this with Ford later in the episode, is that Ford can disconnect them from reality as he is the creator. He views himself as a god, and these are his creations and his world. Whereas Arnold didn't prefer humans, he actually preferred the hosts, and he started to connect with them on a human level, which was a big mistake. And he ended up dying in the park because that almost seemed more real to him than reality itself. And that really raises the question, what is the maze? And a lot of you guys have been speculating in the comment section below. Some people have said that it's an off switch, like Agent Pepsi 1 and Almer Dizanovic. I'm sorry I butchered your name. As you go there, and it's an off switch and it almost frees the hosts in a sense. But I think the maze really connects to the doll and the religion aspect of the show. We've seen this doll, and Hector tells her that it's pretty much a man that can walk between worlds. And this is definitely, I think, a place where Arnold is. He's been a human, but then also he could be now an AI. He made himself into an AI, which he's a man in both worlds. And this is all I got now, but the maze could be a place where you can convert yourself from real into artificial. And it's kind of a jumping off point into the new race, a new species. And I think the Man in Black has a real connection with Westworld, and I think he's almost pursuing being a part of it, like Arnold has. And he doesn't plan on leaving. And I feel like in the past he was in love with Dolores. That's why he kept visiting her in episode 2. So I think the maze is almost a point where you can reach, where you can be a part of the world, instead of an investor paying to experience it. So then they end up going on their quest. The Man in Black says all he needs is a pistol, a match, and Lawrence. So we get a shot of them in the carriage, and Man in Black is trying to make some small talk. Talking to Lawrence, saying, you're going to give me the silent treatment the whole way there. Which kind of shows that I feel like the Man in Black has this connection with Lawrence that he doesn't quite realize. Because I think the Man in Black has been with Lawrence before. It's been mentioned, he knows him really well. And I think they were actually close. But Lawrence obviously doesn't remember because he always gets wiped. So the Man in Black tries to have a cigar, but they get taken away, but he ends up keeping one of them. And then the Man in Black goes on to tell Lawrence that he's never made his own choices, and he's been a prisoner his whole life, and the Man in Black wants to set him free. And I think this really relates to the Men in Black and Arnold. Both seem to prefer the host over real life. And I think he's really trying to pursue Arnold's goal. And I think the Man in Black really does respect all these hosts. And he loves the world so much, but I think if he almost removed the scripted part of the world, he'd enjoy it so much more because he loves the people in that world. And I think you could say he does want to set them free. You could say that he set Dolores free. by taking her into the barn and raping her. As terrible as it sounds, he gave her trauma. And he's giving them this terrible experience, which makes them more human. Suffering is what brings on humanity, as he says, to these robots. So it's almost like he's trying to make them more human. And he's on a goal to do that. And you could say what he did to Dolores was a driving force in making her more human and made her the Dolores that can actually seek out this maze. But they finally arrive and the Man in Black gets locked up, and Lawrence gets ready to be shot and killed. And the Man in Black meets Hector, and he tells Hector that he is his salvation, which is even more imagery that he is the savior of the hosts. And I think that's an interesting connection because Ford is obviously a god who just watches over the guests, and the Man in Black is taking the role of the savior from the prison that Ford has created for them. And Arnold, I believe, took that same role. They had different visions. Ford realized that it was fake and he wanted to be a god, and Arnold loved the world so much he felt like they were in a prison and wanted to rescue them. So the Man in Black uses the cigars, which blow up, which I found really interesting how, they actually have control over everything. They use a pyrotechnic technique and explode it, which I love the connection of, he's having this badass escape, but at the same time, the people who are working on Westworld actually have a hand in controlling it. And I love the shot. Lawrence is expecting to be killed, and while he's blindfolded, we see him react, and the Man in Black saves him last minute. And then he wakes up like, holy shit. It's happened twice now, where he thinks he's gonna die, and the Man in Black saves him. So the Man in Black finally gets the story behind Armistice's tattoo. She was 7, and a bunch of masked men, devils, with horns, killed everybody. And I think these are definitely the people who attacked Teddy, and that killed Teddy. Well, didn't really kill him, they left him hanging off of a tree. And she said she took her mother's blood and had to paint her face to pretend to be dead. And now she tracks these people and kills them and uses their blood to paint her tattoo. And what I find interesting with this is that she can kill them. And Teddy actually wasn't able to kill them, which speaks to Teddy. And how he was meant to lose, he's always meant to lose, and Ford used him as a plot point for something. And Teddy had to lose in order to progress the story forward. And then we learn that the head of the snake is unpainted, which is actually Wyatt, which ends up being Teddy's nemesis. So we'll see how that plays out, but I know Teddy was meant to lose in that instance. Then we go to Maeve and Clementine, and they're walking into town, and we see Maeve find a doll fall out of a girl's bag, and the doll very much resembles the people who work on Maeve when she's out of Westworld, and the picture that she drew. And she wants to find answers about it. But a man says that it's just a new religion, and you won't hear anything about it from the natives. And the natives follow this religion. So it just makes me wonder, why do the natives have this religion? And we've also seen them scalping Maeve. And we know that in some skulls of people, there's the map of the man in the maze. And it seems like these natives are very aware of the creator. So could it say that the natives are also approaching the maze? Because they seem very self-aware compared to the rest of the hosts. But then we flash to them back inside of the brothel, and they suspect that Hector's men are actually in there, which really foreshadows an event that's coming later. Then we get a scene that's more character development. Bernard is with Theresa. I'm not going to talk about it much, but she has a meeting with Ford tomorrow, and Bernard pretty much tells her to be confident and not fearful. Don't cross your arms because it shows weakness. Be powerful. So we flash to Theresa the next day about to talk to Bernard, and they pretty much just talk a bit, and then Ford tells her to come with him. And they walk past a lot of hosts working, and then they have some lunch. And Bernard asks her if she thinks he lost his way. And all she says is that she wants to protect his legacy. And Ford asks her if she even likes the place, and he assumes that she doesn't like the place. And she talks about her childhood and how she knew it was a place that wasn't really meant for her. And she thought that she sat around the same location that she was sitting in, talking to Ford. And Ford kind of goes into backstory. He says that he imagined everything would be perfectly balanced. But it seems like today he's kind of a contradiction. He's not looking for balance. I feel like he's looking for mistakes. Because mistakes is what makes things more human. And that seems like what Arnold was also pursuing. And he said that he had a bet with Arnold over this. And, they had 100 storylines and nobody took them up on it. And that Arnold really didn't like people. He preferred the hosts. And Arnold also begged Ford not to let the money men in, the shareholders. But Ford told Arnold that it would all be fine, and the money men actually don't know what they're paying for. Ford goes on to say that it's not a business venture. Westworld isn't a theme park. It's an entire world. And Ford designed every piece of it. And I think this really speaks to his agenda. He doesn't have interest in shareholders or management. He has interest in what he's trying to create. And I think him and Arnold had the same vision in creating a realistic, whole new world where they get to be God. And we see this, for example, when he dismisses Lee's storyline, because it offers no depth to the world. It just offers a bunch of coded storylines that really go nowhere. Whereas Ford, I believe, is approaching religion and these deeper concepts of life. And Ford goes on to show his control when he freezes everybody. And he says that they were gods and everyone was their guest. And even Theresa is their guest. But Ford goes on to say that Arnold lost his perspective and he went mad. And Ford goes on to say that he sees things very clearly. And that goes on to say that they have the same vision, but Ford is able to disconnect himself from his creations and see that he created them and he is God. And we see when he cuts his robot in the last episode that he has that disconnect. He knows what they are, whereas Arnold kind of slipped in to a different reality where he wanted to believe that his creations were real. And that was really the disconnect. And then Theresa actually realizes that she's sitting in the very location and seat as she was when she was a child. And Ford goes on to say, very creepily, that they know everything about their employees. And he hopes that she's very careful with Bernard because he has a sensitive disposition. And he says that there have been many managers like Theresa over the years, and they've managed to make it work. So he asks her to get out of his way. And it just shows Ford's sense of control. Over all this time, he's been able to have full control over Westworld, even though the money men are now in power, it seems like. And this could definitely be a threat. And it also hints at Bernard being a host. Because how would he know that? You know, obviously there's cameras and all these different things. And I'm not a person who throws out everyone's a host. I think the people who are shown to be actual people are indeed people. But I think there's a lot of evidence to back up that Bernard could also be a host. And the fact that, you know, he's feeding information to Ford about Theresa. But that being said, he's not full host. He's given a sense of humanity that the others aren't getting. So he can think from himself and pursue his own agenda and goals. But it's ironic how they actually in line with Ford. So Theresa pretty much gets up and says that the board will agree with her. But then Ford says that they already have came and approved his project. So he ends up moving all the hosts away, commands them to leave, which shows a sense of control, and then pretty much something comes to demolish the building. And he says that the story isn't going to be retrospective, which means that it's not going to just be repetitive of the same thing. It's not going to rely on the past. He's creating something innovative, and it just shows that he has everything in his back pocket, and he really has control over Westworld. And then we snap to William going for his bounty with Logan, and he tells Dolores to stay. And they go in. And what I find interesting about this is it's pretty much exactly like a video game. They go in, they're having fun, Logan's drinking, and he gets an upgrade. And he gets a gun upgrade, so the whole scene's kind of fun. And then we quickly shoot again to the man in black who finds Teddy. And the man in black says that Teddy's only really got misery. And they end up cutting him down and they take him with them. And I think that just shows that Teddy is literally just a chess piece. He was meant to get brutally injured and hung up there for the purpose of story. So it could be that Ford is in a sense working with the man in black to try and pursue a goal. Maybe to find the maze. Who knows? And then we cut back to William and Logan and they actually have their bounty. And the hostage says that his boss will pay more for the bounty. And Logan ends up just killing their ally. And William is pissed. But Logan wants to go on a different quest and pursue Elazo. And this whole thing goes down where Dolores doesn't want to let him go. And there ends up being a showdown. And then they actually end up going their separate ways. William is now alone with Dolores. And now I think we're going to see them go on this huge kind of adventure that really plays a part into the present timeline. Then the last scene is really interesting. I love how they reflect back on episode 1. It's the same plot point, but it's so different. So Hector comes into town with armed students and actually a couple of guests. And they come in to take the safe. And it's shot way differently. And Maeve finds Hector and takes him upstairs to the safe. She offers him a deal where Hector gives her answers and she gives him the code to the safe. And he pretty much says that the world is madness. and she wants to know about the picture of the man. While this is happening, Ashley jams all the weapons because a family's coming into town, so they kind of clear out the town. And then Hector goes on to say that the picture is sacred native lore, and they make figures of him. And he also asks her if she's seen him, and he says that this man walks between worlds, and he's sent from hell to oversee our world. And Maeve also wants him to cut at her stomach to try and get a bullet out, to prove what she's thinking. She remembers being shot, but she has no markings. So he pulls out the bullet, and it proves that they're living multiple lives. So they end up just kissing and waiting until they get shot, because it doesn't matter, because time is going to reset anyway. So I think Maeve has really come a long way in discovering answers, and, who knows how much she'll be able to carry into the next episode when she gets reset. But now Hector is involved in it. So maybe, what Maeve doesn't remember, Hector will remember, and it's going to be a continuum. But unfortunately, that's all I have for today, everybody. It's really hard talking alone without anybody to bounce ideas off of. So I guarantee next episode, Trevor's going to be there, and it's going to be a lot longer, and we're going to delve deeper into ideas. But I just wanted to get some things off my chest. So I look forward to that, and I'll see you guys later.